on to, again, a completely different topic. And this one here is not so much about assessing democracy as it is to expose people to the concept of ideology. Oftentimes what happens when people are talking about politics is they confuse two things. Party identification, so which party somebody feels like, oh, by the way, we're back in my kitchen, that's our window wall. So try and stay focused on me, but I had people asking me questions in my class about, hey, who is that picture and who is that and who is that? I'm just trying to make it more visually interesting, and so that's why we have a nice background. I'm just trying to mix things up. So anyways, oftentimes what people do is students do is they confuse ideology and party identification. So let's be clear about the difference between these two. Party identification is basically which party somebody identifies with. If somebody were to say to you, which party do you feel closer to, or do you agree with more, the Democratic Party or the Republican Party? If you have a strong preference one way or another, that is your party identification. Okay, that's your party identification. And party identification sort of gets passed down from parent to child in much the same way that religion gets passed down. Oftentimes, if you have two parents who are the same religion, the child, if the child will be the same religion as well. If you have two parents who belong to the same party, the child will oftentimes be the same party as well. So if you have two Republican parents, you'll be a Republican. If you have two Democratic parents, you'll be a Democrat. Not always, but that's the general pattern. Ideology is something different. Ideology, if you look on the lecture notes, the definition is, ideology refers to a system of beliefs and values about the proper order of society and the proper role of government. Ideology sort of has to do more with what you think about how the world should be, or not the world, how the government should act, how society should be organized, the rules that should guide behavior. And right now, in the year 2012 and lately, it's the case that party ID and ideology match up pretty closely, meaning that most Democrats are liberals and most Republicans are conservatives. And so a lot of times students think that liberal and Democrat are interchangeable terms. They mean one and the same thing. And that conservative and Republican are the same thing as well, that they're interchangeable. You can use either one, whether you're talking about Democrats or liberals, makes no difference. That's wrong. That's wrong, because they are two different things. It used to be, and later on in the quarter, I'll actually show this to you, it used to be back in the day that there were actually conservative Democrats. So the ideology was conservative, but people called themselves Democrats. There were liberal Republicans. And so, and for many people, it's like, well, that doesn't even make any sense, but it's true. So you have to make a point. Remember, we're doing political science. We want to be very precise in the words we use. So even though right now there is a strong sort of connection between liberal and Democrat, conservative and Republican, that's just because this is the time that we've grown up in. This is the time that you're learning about politics, but that's not always been the case, and it's not always going to be the case. That may very well change over time. So party ID, party identification over here, ideology over here. Two separate things. Connected, most definitely connected, but different things. Now, with that in mind, the two dominant ideologies in the United States are what liberalism and conservatism. Liberals and conservatives. There are other ideologies. We're going to talk about some of them, but these are really the two dominant ones. Now, one of the challenges about talking about ideology is that what I will tell you is that I'm either a liberal or a conservative. It doesn't matter which one I am, because when I'm teaching this class, it doesn't matter. It's political science again, and the goal is to be objective and analytical in our understanding of politics. But it means that when I'm describing what liberals think and what conservatives think, at least for one group, I'm describing something that I'm not. And so if in me giving my definitions, if you feel like I've left something out, what I want you to do is I want you to email me and say, hey, Phil, you know, when you talk about liberals or when you talk about conservatives, maybe you should include this or maybe you should include that. Now, I'm not saying, when I talk about this, I'm not saying that every liberal believes what I'm about to say, and I'm not saying that every conservative believes what I'm about to say. I'm just saying that there's there's a pattern, and that the things that I'm going to describe fit the general pattern. So let's start off with liberalism. What are the basic, when I talk about the basic premises, I mean, like, what are the sort of the foundational ideas? What are the ideas that sort of underpin and sort of support what liberals think? Well, first, when it comes to the proper role of government, liberals believe that the proper role of government should be active, that the government should be very active. The idea is that people left to their own devices, people without rules would go ahead and be selfish, mean. They would take advantage of other people. And that what you need is the government to step in to make a more perfect union. You need the government to step in and go ahead and create a more just society, to keep people within certain bounds. And that it's the role of the government to do that. And the government should take an active role in that. So the proper role of government is active. That the government should be there acting, being active and looking for areas of injustice in the world and trying to correct that. In terms of the proper role of society, liberals believe that the proper role of society or order of society should be egalitarian. Now, if we were in a class, I would go ahead and I would write that word on the board for you. Since we're here, it's a little bit harder to do, and because when I write words and then I show it on the camera, the letters are actually backwards, so that doesn't work, and I'm not good enough at writing things backwards to go ahead and do this, so I'm just going to spell it for you. Egalitarian, but I actually need to write it out myself first. So it's E-G-A-L-I-T-A-R-I-A-N. Egalitarian. So again, let me spell it one more time. E-G-A-L-I-T-A-R-I-A-N. Egalitarian. What does egalitarian mean? Egalitarian means sort of equal, in that for liberals, the idea is that the society should be ordered in a way that everybody is more or less equal, or put a little bit differently, that there shouldn't be extremely wealthy people and extremely poor people, that there should be a greater equality among people, that so that's the basic idea. But not, and I don't want to go too far and say it's not like everybody should drive the same car and everybody should have 2.5 kids and everybody should live in a house with a white picket fence and all that kind of stuff. It's not that everybody has to be totally equal, but there shouldn't be huge disparities in rights. There shouldn't be huge disparities in income. There should be a leveling off. Everybody should be more or less equal. So that's what liberals believe. Now, what about conservatives? Again, when I talk about the basic premises of conservatism, I'm talking about the foundational ideas, like sort of what are the ideas that support this idea of conservatism. Well, in terms of the proper role of government, this is where liberals and conservatives disagree very strongly. For conservatives, the argument is that oftentimes when the government is active, it actually screws things up more than it helps. That oftentimes, if society is sort of left to its own devices, that if you go ahead and you just let, like for example, in economic matters, let the market decide how things are going to go, that's going to produce something far more efficient and far better than having the government sort of impose something. So rather than, for example, setting a minimum wage, right, that you let the market decide how much people should be paid. And what that does is that, for example, instead of guaranteeing that everybody makes a certain amount of money, you go ahead and you create incentives for people to go ahead and improve themselves to get the extra money. That's the idea. That if the government would stay out of things, things would run significantly more smoothly than when the government gets involved. That oftentimes it gets involved for the best reasons, with the best intentions, but winds up screwing things up, for lack of a better word. So in terms of the proper role of government, the proper role of government is supposed to be, let's call it less active, or I don't want to say passive because that's not necessarily true, but significantly less active than what a liberal thinks. Now, conservatives do not believe that the government shouldn't take any role. If there's injustice going on, if there's some problems going on, the government certainly should step in. But for the most part, it should be almost like the last resort. Let society try to work it out on its own, and then the government becomes more involved if nothing else is fixing the problem. In terms of the proper order of society, for lack of a better word, I'm just going to call it, for conservatives, non-egalitarian. Non-egalitarian. And what I mean by that is that the general idea is that for conservatives, it is the case that there are going to be people in society who are going to be very wealthy, and there are going to be people who are poor. And that's okay, because there are some people in society who are really active and really innovative and really creative, and they work really hard, and those people are going to get more stuff because they're working harder, because they're more innovative, because they're trying really hard. And then there are other people who are going to go ahead and not have very much. Some of them are going to be lazy. Some of them are not going to be very creative. They're not going to improve themselves. They're not going to get an education, and they're not going to have very much. And that's okay. Talent, ambition, drive isn't equally distributed. Everybody doesn't have equal amounts of it. And so the rewards that come from that aren't going to be equally distributed as well. Now, that's not to suggest that conservatives believe that everybody who's poor necessarily is lazy and not creative and not innovative. But the general idea is that you create a society where everybody can go ahead and succeed. And if there is a disparity, that's not necessarily a bad thing. If that disparity in terms of wealth and influence, if it matches how hard people are working, if it matches how creative and innovative people are, that's okay. So Steve Jobs, in this theory, or Bill Gates, is going to have more stuff than somebody who graduated from high school and started working at some menial job. They decided that out of high school they're going to go ahead and they're going to get a job at McDonald's. I'm not criticizing McDonald's, but they get a job at McDonald's, a very low-skilled job, and they stay there and they work there. They say, I'm going to make a career here at McDonald's. They're going to have less stuff, and that's okay. That's the way it is. And so it's the idea that everybody should be equal is not part of conservative thinking. There can be wealthy people, there can be poor people, but as long as that matches sort of the talent, the effort, the energy, then that's okay. Two different ways of thinking about the proper order of society and the proper role of the government.